Earlier, I did a review of the Vostok Amphibia, one of the world's most affordable dive watches. Today, I'm reviewing its elder brother, the watch that started it all, the Komandirsky, the military commander's watch. For years, this watch was the mainstay of the Soviet military. And over time, it's earned the nickname the AK-47 of watches. It is, in fact, the perfect nickname for this remarkable watch, for both good reasons and not so great reasons. And what are the differences between a Komandirsky and an Amphibia watch anyway? All that coming up next. Before even getting into the details of the watch itself, I'll just say that it's somewhat of a miracle that the first Moscow watch factory that is now Vostok even survived at all. During World War II, or as they call it, the Great Patriotic War, the entire factory was threatened with being blown to smithereens by the Germans. So it was loaded up onto freight cars, barges, and even horseback over an ice road on its way to the relative middle of nowhere to Chistopol. During the war years, the factory produced things like tank clocks, fuses, and torpedo timers. But after the war, they began making watches again. And in 1965, the Ministry of Defense received their first order for a watch to be used for military commanders. As a field watch, it had to be dustproof, shockproof, water-resistant, and function well in cold or heat. Basically, the same kind of toughness expectations as a 1930s Rolex Oyster, but in a mass production watch. The result is this watch, the Komandirsky. This one is the model 211306, Tank Commander's Watch, Body Style 21. One of the first questions many people ask is, what's the difference between a Komandirsky and the Amphibia dive watch that was released later? So let's get this out of the way right now. Originally, the distinctions were very clear and related to the mission for each watch. The Komandirsky being a field watch and the Amphibia being the diver's watch. The Komandirsky has a chrome-plated brass case versus the stainless steel case on an Amphibia. The Komandirsky has 2 mm thick acrylic glass versus 3 mm, a 0.5 mm caseback versus a 1 mm caseback, again on the originals, hand winding movement versus an automatic movement, an unmarked bezel versus a marked diving bezel on the Amphibia, and finally, water resistance of 30 meters versus a water resistance of 100 meters. Nowadays, the specs have changed and these very firm distinctions are basically gone. Most Komandirsky are close to the original specs, this one is, but some models now have 100 meters or even 200 meters water resistance. They have automatic movements and stainless steel cases. Some have a screw-down crown and some don't. So what's the difference? Well, these days, essentially, a Komandirsky is a Komandirsky if Vostok says it is. So without further ado, let's go to the watch itself. When the watch arrived, it came in this shrink-wrap packaging with "Made in Russia" on it, so it was very well protected, so I was glad to see that. And inside was a simple cardboard box with Komandirsky at the top and Men's Mechanical Watch written on it. And on the bottom, the "Made in Russia" writing as well. So a nice simple box. You know, if you've watched my previous videos, that if a watch is inexpensive, I prefer simple packaging because I don't want my money to be going into the packaging. I want it to be going into the watch. The watch does come with an instruction manual, but it's written in Cyrillic, so not much good for me, but if you speak Russian, it's all there. It also comes with a warranty card, although once again, the cost of shipping it back to Russia for servicing probably would be about the same as the watch, so it's probably not very useful, but it is there. Now first the specs. This watch has a case made of chrome-plated brass, except for the back plate, which is cold-stamped stainless steel, 1.1 millimeters thick. That's more than twice the thickness of the 1965 version. And it has an obviously understated 20 meters water resistance. Being that this is a screw-down crown, and with the way it's made, I'd say it's probably good for 100, although I haven't tested it. But it's definitely better than 20. That's an understatement. The backplate of the watch is stamped with the Russian Imperial Eagle, and the description water-resistant and dust-resistant above the eagle in Cyrillic, and Russia underneath. The dial is made of painted cupronickel, that's copper nickel alloy, with non-radioactive phosphor-illuminated dial markers. The movement in this watch, and I'll get to that later in detail, but it's the 17 joule 2414A movement, a classic Soviet watch movement, running at 19,800 beats per minute, hand winding with a 38-hour power reserve. Curiously, this watch has a bidirectional rotating bezel, even though the bezel doesn't have any dial markers, and so you can't use it for anything. The reason is because some models of Komandirsky do have marks on the bezel that you can use for timing, and so this one still has that feature even though it's a plain bezel. The Vostok strap on this watch is pretty interesting. It's got the trademark pyramid raised padded platform in the middle, and the stitching is really thick and robust. Really good, strong quality leather, but as you can see, very crudely made, especially at the edges. So you can see where this is a military watch. This is not designed to be worn at dinner parties. This is a field watch made to be tough and to last. I quite like them. I sometimes buy these straps for other watches that are non-Vostok just because they're so durable. The glass on this watch is domed acrylic, a classic material for a 1950s, 1960s watch, which is the same as the plexiglass around a hockey rink. The advantage of acrylic is that you can smack it around with force and it won't break, which is a great quality obviously for a military watch. The disadvantage is that it scratches very easily compared to harder glass. Once your watch crystal becomes scratchy from wear, and eventually it will, you have two choices. One is you can buy a new crystal for between $3 and $5 from a wholesaler and install it or have someone do it for you. If the scratches aren't deep, the easiest thing to do is just buff them out. To do that, all you need is some toothpaste and your thumb and to make circles on the dial, or if you have a larger buffing wheel on a grinder, you can use the buffing wheel. Just a note on this, from experience I can tell you, don't use the small buffing wheel type that you'd find on a Dremel tool. It's too small, it may buff it, but if you use too much pressure it might just as easily make a gouge. So just use your thumb and some toothpaste or a larger buffing wheel and it'll do the trick. Now let me demonstrate how to wind this watch, because although this is a field watch, I'm unscrewing the crown here. It has a screw down crown similar to a dive watch. So you unscrew the crown and then from that position you wind the watch. So just winding here. You can keep winding until it tightens. Don't worry about ruining the mainspring because this is a modern mainspring and they don't break like the old ones do. So once it's wound, you screw the crown back on, or if you want to set the time, you pop it out a little further, and there we go, and then you can set the hours. Now interestingly, to set the date, there is no third position. What you have to do is just cycle through. So I'm going through here, and once I get to midnight, this is noon, so nothing will happen. It still shows the 27th on the date indicator. And then when I get to the second 12 o'clock position, you'll see it'll switch over to 28. Now, if I want to make this faster, rather than go through the whole 24 hours, I can just skip back and forth between 10 and 2, and that'll advance the dates a little faster. Now, to open the case back on this watch, I'm using a caseback tool, but as you can see, it's marked with R, and that's because on Russian watches, a lot of things are slightly different sizes, and the caseback tool Western doesn't fit into the grooves, so I had to file down the pins on this caseback opening tool in order to open the caseback on Russian watches. The movement powering this watch is the 17-joule in-house Vostok 2414A movement. All 248 parts are made in Russia for Vostok or in the factory, which these days is almost unheard of for a watch manufacturer, and it's one of the things I really love. I really appreciate an in-house movement as opposed to something generic. Now, when you remove the case back here, you can see it's in two parts. There's the outer ring, and then there's an inner case back which goes flat, and you'll see that when I take the ring off. Just like the Amphibia, an ingenious design, and it makes it really a stable, secure system. So when you pop off the case back here, just lift it out, you can see the huge sintered rubber O-ring underneath that case back to give it great water resistance. And there's the movement. So one of the notable things about this movement is not only how simple and toughly built it is, but on the negative side, how roughly finished and relatively inaccurate it is. You won't find any perlage, Geneva stripes, blued screws, screws on the balance wheel, nothing like that. Vostok is more than capable of making beautiful movements, and movements with incredible accuracy. This isn't one of them. Remember I said this is the AK-47 of watches? Well, here's where I get into the AK-47 comparison. I don't actually know anyone who owns an AK-47, so I borrowed the next best thing, a Russian SKS, which uses a very similar mechanism. And these rifles are not known for their accuracy, but they're famous for their reliability and durability. The Soviets knew that in the field, a rifle that doesn't fire is just a club. So, they didn't care about the looks or the fine finishing. Same thing on the T-34 tank, by the way. They didn't care about the looks or the finishing. They didn't even paint it half the time. They just wanted it to be reliable and accurate enough to get the job done. And it's the same thing with the 2414A movement. It isn't beautiful, it isn't finished well, but it has a 10-year service interval, and it's tough as hell. Before leaving the factory, each watch is tested in accordance with the Russian GOST 107798 testing system, and that includes, things you'd expect, like testing the watches in cooling cabinets to 0 degrees Celsius, that's 32 Fahrenheit, heating cabinets to 40 Celsius, that's 104 Fahrenheit, a water pressure chamber, a vibrating conveyor belt to test for vibrations, and more. And it's all timed before it leaves the factory on an MTG 5000 time grapher. I read somewhere that when the Afghanis were fighting the Soviet Union, ironically using Soviet weapons like the AK-47, many of them had never cleaned their rifles. They didn't even own cleaning kits. And in my experience, this is also true about Russians and their watches. I've seen quite a few Komandirsky that hadn't been serviced in so long, the oil had gone from smooth to gummy to hard, and yet the watch had never stopped running. Now, the trade-off to such loose tolerances and long service life is the accuracy. So Vostok guarantees an accuracy of -20 to +60 seconds per day, which is shockingly inaccurate for a 20th century movement. However, there are two things to consider about this. At 17 Joules Info, a website, they did a test of the 2414A movement and, like other people, found large beat errors in the different hand positions, but noted that they tended to neutralize each other. So practically this means that if you wear this watch while you're sitting at your desk and you're in the same position all day, the time will likely be out by a lot. But, for example, if you wear it in the field or somewhere where you're constantly moving, it will be more accurate. So this is a watch that demands, and in fact requires action to work accurately. When I wear this watch, it runs pretty consistently fast by 12 to 15 seconds per day, which is fine by me since I rarely wear it for more than 2 days in a row anyway. Now, if your watch is running fast by more than 20 seconds per day, or slow than more than 20 seconds per day, and doing that consistently, it probably just needs to be re-regulated. So I'll just zoom into the balance wheel here so you can see what area of the watch you're looking at in the close-up. And this is what the balance wheel looks like. And this is going to be the lever that you use to adjust the time. So the way you think of this as this lever running through the balance wheel to the other side, sort of pointing at the other side, is the way you look at it. So if you move this lever downward in this direction, it'll point more toward the plus. And if you move it upwards in this direction, it'll point more toward the minus. So you put it to the plus if you want the watch to run faster, and to the minus if you want the watch to run slower. And what that does is it changes the length of the balance wheel spring. Now this is a different Komandirsky, one in need of servicing. As you can see, it's running really fast, plus 78 seconds per day. So this is why I'm using this watch as an example. But it works the same way as the other Komandirsky in the video. So what I'm going to do is just nudge the lever over ever so slightly. It doesn't take a big move. And even with that little move, plus 39, I actually made a mistake here. The line was almost running flat, but I just paid attention to the plus 39, so I gave it another nudge here. Ever so slightly. And with that, it's running minus 17 seconds per day. So you can see how small a movement is required. So I needed to do a bit of fidgeting, a little bit of fidget here, fidget there. And after a couple minutes, the end result is plus 3. It'll change just slightly here in a second to plus 6 seconds per day in horizontal position. And it was running about -4 in vertical position, so that's just about perfect. This will run very accurately, although it still does need to be serviced. Now, since I have the case back open, there's one more thing I'd like to point out, and that's this spring bar that acts as a shock absorber and holds down the center seconds pinion. In the vintage market for these watches, there's a lot of Chinese fakes, but they're based on the Swiss ETA movement, not a Russian movement, and so they do not have this part. If you're in the market for a vintage watch, this is one way to tell that you're looking at the genuine article. To put the case back on, it's a very simple procedure. You just lay it flat with the notch fitting into the groove made for it and give it a press. And then the outer ring goes on top and you give it a hand turn like this. Nice and snug, and then you can use the case back tool to do the final tightening. And you don't need to press these too tight. You just do it with a bit of pressure until it catches, and that's good enough. When you dive with it or when you go into the water, the pressure of the case actually presses down on the sintered rubber seal, and it seals quite well. Really an ingenious design. I love it. I've spoken about this before, but it's just so simple and so easy to use. I really like this design. If you look at the dots around the numbers, that's the Loom. This is a field watch not really known for its Loom, but it does have it. They're fairly small points, so they don't last a long time, about 15 or 20 minutes at most in my experience. But they look okay during that time. You can notice at the 12 o'clock it's got the double dot, so you can orient to the 12 in case you get a bit off kilter. That reference point is there. The Loom, like I said, the points are small, so they're not going to give you an enhanced look on the dial in dim light, like some dive watches do. They look quite unique in dim light, but it does work in the dark as a basic feature, and that's about all there is to say about it. Now I have to say, I really like the way this watch wears. It's a 39mm case, so a classic case size that looks great on most people. Very thin, as you can see, with an 18mm strap and 18mm lugs with a padded strap, leather. So Fits really well, comfortable, really nice design. I just really like the way this wears and fits on the wrist. About half the citizens of Chistopol, the location of the Vostok watch factory, are descendants of the Mongol hordes of Genghis Khan, the Turkic Bashkir and the Kalmyks, who all conquered their way west from the steppes, plundering and pillaging along the way. The other half are descendants of the Rus, a Viking tribe that conquered its way east from Sweden, plundering and pillaging along the way. And it seems to me that this ethnic background provides some extra character and attitude that goes into the watch and even shows in the slogan of the Vostok Watch Company itself. Rolex's slogan is, or was, "A crown for every achievement," a reference to the Rolex crown logo and the fact that it's often given for retirements and special occasions and such. Casio's slogan is, or was, "Technology for life." Also a nice slogan, explains itself well. Vostok's slogan is, "To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women." Oh, pardon me, that's Conan the Barbarian's slogan. Vostok's slogan is, "Time will always respect and support that which is strong, but will turn to dust that which is weak." Best watch slogan ever. Now, this Komandirsky is a tanker's watch, but similar styles are also made for paratroopers, submariners, bombardiers, and others. So no matter what branch of the military you are or want to associate with, it's available. So what's my conclusion about this watch? Well, with an inaccuracy of around 10 seconds a day or more, there is a serious trade-off between the reliability of this watch and its accuracy. Also, this is a hand-wound watch, not an automatic. A select few people, such as myself, think that winding a watch is a great morning ritual, but most people won't. So if you're thinking of this watch as your daily wear watch, I can't say I'd recommend it. As a conversation piece, it's fantastic, or as a mission-specific watch, it's also great. For any outdoor activity like kayaking or sailing or hiking, it's a dream. It's low profile, so it doesn't get caught on your gear like a G-Shock or a typical dive watch. Of course, you don't need to worry about the battery running out. It's water resistant, shockproof, and tough. Overall, is it as practical for sports as a quartz? Probably not, but it also has a whole different character and history that makes it something special. And due to the price and toughness and the history of this watch, I just love it, and I love the way it wears. Although I gave this particular watch to my brother, I already own a few already, and the probability of me buying another is 100%. In fact, I currently have my eyes on 3. One of the bad things about the low price and interesting designs of this watch, and by low price, by the way, you can get these for sub $50. One of the bad things about that is that they can become addictive. So, just a warning. In the comments section, I've put a link to the watch itself, to other similar models that I like in this style, as well as to the strap and to the caseback opening tool. So if you're interested in one of these watches, please support this channel and use one of those links. Otherwise, that's my review of the Vostok Komandirsky watch. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video.